So I've pulled back a little bit from the day-to-day political coverage because it is, for the most part, exhausting and oftentimes quite boring. But sometimes things happen so severe that they warrant attention from every single person who has a microphone and a live stream. Only live streams, only live streamer opinions matter. Anyway, to dispense with any wacky intro, for those of you who recall, there was a suicide bombing that took place at the Kabul airport during the evacuation of, Afghans who assisted America. One which led to the deaths of, what was it, 13 Americans and over 100 Afghans. There were reports that after the initial explosion, panicked American soldiers fired into the crowd and ended up killing even more people. I don't think we have anything to that beyond eyewitness statements that have been given to journalists, so it's difficult to verify whether those are true, and if it's true, the extent to which damage was multiplied by the panic of those soldiers, but it happened nonetheless. The attack was attributed to ISIS-K, the breakfast cereal off-brand variant of everyone's favorite hate terrorist death group, ISIS. This was a huge deal. 13 U.S. troops dead, and of course, American media only cares about U.S. troops that die. I mean, a lot of outlets weren't even reporting on the significantly larger number of Afghans who were killed. Like, you know how many people, Americans, died in Afghanistan? Like 4,000? Over like 150,000 Afghans over the course of the entire Afghanistan war. Like, we only care about our own numbers. And 13 American soldiers died, which is more than have for years now combined. The recent deaths in Afghanistan have mostly been the ANA versus the Taliban. Now, of course, there's just the Taliban. So, a devastating attack carried out, and what does Biden have to do? Biden doesn't want to look weak, so the military, authorizes a drone strike. The drone strike, which attacked and killed, you'll be happy to hear, one person, an ISIS-K militant. Except, oh wait, no it wasn't. It was 3 adults and 10 children. And they were all innocent. Oops. And we want to unhighlight? Jesus, click off. 7 kids, not 10? Did I say 10 kids? No, it was 10 people, 3 adults, 7 kids. A U.S. drone strike in Kabul that killed 10 civilians, including 7 children, see, there's the math right there, was conducted after numerous miscalculations by commanders who wrongly believed an aid worker was hauling explosives in his car, defense officials said Friday, reversing the Pentagon's earlier insistence that the operation prevented an imminent suicide attack on U.S. forces. Now, we're going to peel this apart like layers of an onion because there is a lot to dig into here. First of all, not only was this not a terrorist, this was an aid worker. This was an exemplary human being by any measurable standard. This was a person trying to mend the damage that we and that the Taliban had done in Afghanistan. And he and 2 adults and 7 children, again, obliterated in the blink of an eye by a U.S. drone strike. Now, why exactly did the Pentagon insist earlier that the operation had prevented an imminent suicide attack on U.S. forces? I think it reveals a lot about the Pentagon's reasoning and how we're lied to during wartime. Let's say they're working with bad information. Let's say that the Pentagon, through its many, many, many spies, let's say they hear that there's a guy and he lives at this address and he's secretly ISIS-K and he's going to bring the bomb and etc. There's a suicide bombing to take place, right? And then the missile strikes and it turns out not to be the case. Well, maybe the Pentagon's earlier insistence that the operation prevented a suicide attack was legitimate, Maybe they really did feel that way. Maybe they had just gotten the information wrong, but it seems like they didn't. It seems like they just lied. It's not like they had knowledge of some plot that was going to take place and then they attacked to prevent that plot and it ended up not happening. It's more that they did the drone strike and then to the press they say, yeah. We prevented an imminent suicide attack. What evidence were they working off of? Well, let's find out. What evidence did they use to justify this drone strike? The Defense Department had previously defended the August 29th operation as a righteous strike, saying it tracked a white sedan for hours after the vehicle left a suspected ISIS-K safe house. In fact, the driver, Zamare Ahmadi was a longtime aid worker for a U.S. based group and was hauling water cans for his family, officials acknowledged. Final movements. Last images we've got on this guy before he's vaporized. Water cans. We now know there was no connection between Mr. Ahmadi and ISIS Khorasan, ISIS-K. That his activities on that day were completely harmless and not at all related to the imminent threat we believe we face, and that Mr. Ahmadi was just as innocent a victim as were the others tragically killed, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said in a statement announcing the military's conclusions. We apologize, Austin said, and will endeavor to learn from this horrible mistake, he said, knowing nothing will change. The chain of missteps ending with the missile strike came days after a suicide attack at the Kabul airport, which claimed the lives of at least 170 Afghans and 13 U.S. service members, prompting a sense of urgency among military officials. It also highlights flaws in the Biden administration's strategy for targeting threats that emerge in Afghanistan from a long distance, and approach analysts and critics of the president have panned as being vulnerable to inadequate intelligence and overconfidence among commanders reading ordinary behaviors as evidence of malicious intent. See, there's a zeal here. Do you think that Biden and the administration and the U.S. government is just going to let Afghan people get away with the suicide bombing at Kabul? They had to kill somebody, the Biden administration, because it would make them look weak otherwise. And in their fervor to enact retributive justice, they did a little fucky-wucky. I mean, listen to the language they're using here. Righteous strike. This isn't a careful, coordinated military maneuver. This was a hasty bombing conducted as a way of moralistically enacting righteous retribution. It sounds like the language of a holy war, something that a crusader would say to infidels who had blasphemed them in some previous battle. It's a response to an insult, fundamentally, not a military action. The strike followed days of chaos in Kabul as thousands of Afghans tried to flee through the airport. It capped the U.S.-led war with what has come to symbolize Western intervention in Afghanistan, the Middle East, and Africa, airstrikes that sometimes kill civilians, followed by initial Pentagon denials that it may have made mistakes far from public view, said Brian Kastner, a senior crisis advisor at Amnesty International. The 10 victims belonged to a single extended family, a neighbor who witnessed the attack said in the immediate aftermath. He described a gruesome scene of bodies covered in blood and shrapnel with some of the dead children still in the car. I mean, imagine that just happening in the blink of an eye. It's the terror of drone warfare. At least there's, with traditional warfare, there is some preemptive understanding of enemies amassing outside of your city. But with drone warfare, what's the quote from that one person? I don't even know which country they were from. They said that they used to think clear skies were a beautiful thing, but after America got involved there, they started to hate them, because predator drones can only make their strikes in clear weather. The cloudy skies may be ugly, but it protected them. Pakistan, thank you. Imagine living like that. An entire culture of people who fear the sun because it clears the way for U.S. intervention. The U.S. military was only forced to admit to its failure in this strike because of the current global scrutiny on Afghanistan, said Kastner, a former Air Force bomb technician. This is not the end of their obligations. They have to do their own internal investigation to figure out if any crimes were committed. They haven't even done that yet. External media pressure was the only thing that led to this revelation being confessed by the Pentagon. General Kenneth Frank McKenzie, who heads U.S. Central Command and had oversight of the Afghan mission as it came to an end last month, said Friday that officials were assessing whether anyone would be held responsible for the errant strike. Just that, kill 10 innocent civilians and they have to have this convo. It's like U.S. police times 1,000. You know what I mean? When they do the internal investigation to find out whether or not murdering some unarmed civilian is warranted. Well, here's 10 unarmed civilians. Did anyone make a mistake? I don't know. The U.S. government is discussing ex gratia payments to compensate the victims' families, I'm sure. The commander who oversaw the operation, an American officer who has not been identified publicly, coward, met the standard of reasonable certainty that a threat was imminent, according to one U.S. official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss the military's findings ahead of Friday's announcement. Now, here's the question I ask you guys. Do you believe them? Do you think they met the standard of reasonable certainty that a threat was imminent, according to one U.S. official? Because, I mean, we get lied to by them all the time, and they have every political motivation to downplay the severity of their incompetence here. I suppose it's possible. There could have been some extraordinary set of coincidences that led to them getting information on this fucking U.S. aid worker carrying water jugs to a car, surrounded by children. I guess it's possible. I'm not that inclined to be charitable. The military's acknowledgement comes after 3 news organizations, including the Washington Post, thanks for the self-rep, published investigations of the incident that each cast doubt on the Pentagon's claims, including whether Ahmadi carried any explosives and whether his actions implied a man who delivered meals to displaced peoples was secretly moonlighting as a suicidal insurgent. Mackenzie acknowledged those reports played a role in determining the military's mistakes. This is why we need the media. This is why we need the free press. Because as shit as they are, every once in a while, they do something like this. This is why I have so much distrust for all of the would-be anti-state types out there who despise corporate media, like to a almost fervent ideological level. There are certainly problems with corporate media, but, you know, every once in a while, once in a blue moon maybe, something neat happens. Mackenzie said leading up to the drone strike, intelligence analysts were flooded with dozens of credible reports forecasting attacks on the coalition effort to evacuate Americans and Afghans from the Kabul airport, including links to a white Toyota Corolla, which are among the most common vehicles on the city's roads. Just a white Toyota Corolla, you know, whatever. I think a car might be involved sometime in a future attack, you know. On the morning of August 29th, Ahmadi stopped near a building analysts suspected was an ISIS-K safe house, Mackenzie said. He picked up and dropped off people at various places in the city, the general added, and at a few points the vehicle was loaded and unloaded with cargo. Suspicious. Ahmadi arrived home a few minutes before 5 p.m. under the watchful eye of an armed Reaper drone. Can you even begin to fathom the sheer fucking terror of drone warfare? The father of 4 had a tradition with his kids, the family later said. Ahmadi would hop out of the car and let his children finish parking. Oh, that's a cute way to get learning how to drive early. I think my dad did something like that a couple times. Several piled into the car, his brother said, and they reversed into the courtyard under the shade of a nearby tree. A few minutes after Ahmadi's arrival, the commander fired a single Hellfire missile at the vehicle, destroying the sedan in an explosion and strewing bodies throughout the wreckage and the courtyard. The drone operator did not see any children when the missile launched, according to who? But it was already in flight when the 3 children could be seen just as the missile struck, officials said. Officials say. So they fired the missile a few minutes after Ahmadi's arrival, but he had a family tradition where the children would finish parking after he hopped out of the car. Did he have his kids wait multiple minutes? Did he leave his car in an unparked position for multiple minutes, and then his children came out only after the Hellfire missile had been fired? Surveillance footage from the aid group Ahmadi worked for, Nutrition and Education International, or ISIS-K as the Pentagon calls it, and interviews with its staff provide a portrait of Ahmadi's mundane errands against the backdrop of the city's humanitarian crisis. His route included breakfast with colleagues, trips to a bank and police station visits to coordinate security for food distribution, along with visits to the group's headquarters, said Stephen Kwan, the group's president. You would struggle to find a person less deserving of a drone strike. Here we have his day plan, I guess. Videos captured Ahmadi carrying containers into the compound. He filled them with water to bring home to his family because utilities in Kabul were disrupted following the Taliban's takeover, said the group's country director, who spoke on the condition of anonymity out of fear for his safety. Mackenzie said the heavy packages were suspected to be bundles of explosives, such as the suicide vest used in the airport attack, but upon reviewing the surveillance video and drone footage, commanders learned they had mistaken the water jugs for a bomb. That's right. They had video taken from the drone, accessible to them, before they fired the missile that would have indicated his innocence. They had the video footage on Pentagon hard drives, sitting there, accessible, able to be looked at, and then afterwards they go and review the footage. They saw what they wanted to see. Here's the security footage, by the way. Surveillance footage from right here. This isn't his house. This is one of the compounds that he stopped at. This was hours before he was killed. But this footage revealed it was just water? They couldn't have, reviewed it? Those types of canisters are common for insurgents to fill with homemade explosives because they're inexpensive, have handles, and can hold a lot of weight. That's all containers. What? Inexpensive, have handles, and can hold a lot of weight are characteristics you would use to describe any kind of container that anyone would use for anything. That's what do you think the people in fucking Afghanistan are carrying their shit around in? Target bags? Do you think they have fanny pack? I assume they have some fanny packs, maybe. And it's possible commanders familiar with that practice were overconfident about their conclusions without considering possible alternatives. Plausible alternatives, Kastner said. A physicist who assessed imagery from the site for the... By the way, guys, if you're wondering why I'm just reading this, it's because, unlike the Washington Post, I don't have journalists on the other side of the planet gathering intel. I'm sorry. I'll have to defer to their evidence and my analysis. Not much else I can do. A physicist who assessed imagery from the site for the Post estimated the blast's force to be about 22 pounds of explosives at the high end, within the range of a Hellfire missile's payload. A described secondary blast, experts said, was probably the result of fuel vapors igniting. So they struck it with a missile, and then there was a second blast as well. The investigation concurred with that assessment, McKenzie said, with the likeliest scenario being a fuel canister near the car going up in flames. The Pentagon is no longer describing that reaction as an explosion. Now, the thing that I find interesting about this is you can cross-check this with a New York Times article, which talks, I think, a little bit more about this. Let me see if I can find the exact... Since the August 29 strike, U.S. military officials justify their actions by citing an even larger blast that took place afterwards in the courtyard where Mr. Ahmadi made his final stop. So essentially, U.S. military officials made the argument that, oh, we got the right guy. Look, there was a second explosion after the first one, as though he was carrying explosives. But an examination of the scene of the strike conducted by the Times Visual Investigations team and a Times reporter the morning afterwards, and followed up with a second visit 4 days later, found no evidence of a second, more powerful explosion. Experts who examined photos and videos pointed out that, though, there was clear evidence of a missile strike and subsequent vehicle fire, like, the car being on fire, there were no collapsed or blown out walls, no destroyed vegetation, and only one dent in the entrance gate, indicating a single shockwave. Military officials said investigators now believe the second explosion was a flare-up from a propane tank in the courtyard, or possibly a gas tank at the second vehicle in the courtyard. Or to put it another way, the U.S. military lied about there being a second stronger explosion, and now, after journalists called them out in it, are saying it was a propane tank. A propane tank does not explode harder than a Hellfire missile. Now, admittedly, I have never exploded a Hellfire missile or a propane tank. So I'm saying this with a little bit of, maybe unearned confidence, but I'm pretty sure a Hellfire missile explodes bigger than a propane tank. Then why did the U.S. military say there was a second, larger explosion? Why any of this? Why has the military's intel been so fucked on all of this? They had video footage indicating that he wasn't carrying explosives for hours before they killed him, but they still killed him. They had video footage of the location that he arrived at, and then they drone striked him at it. And apparently the children only appeared after the missile had been fired. They had video footage from the drone after the Hellfire missile, and then they lied and said there was a second, larger explosion. But then they walked back on that once the media called them out. They lied about everything in a desperate attempt to cover for the administration's attempt to stop themselves from looking weak. It's just a chain of overconfident or dishonest military men and political officials combining to attempt to procure a narrative that would be favorable to the president. Anyway, we should probably finish the... Whether anyone is disciplined, human rights advocates say the lesson should serve as a wake-up call to the military. Oh yeah, sure. Which has long waxed eloquent about lessons learned, but continues to make errant strikes that end up killing civilians. There is no Department of Defense policy on civilian casualties. That's after 20 years of fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan with mistakes like this, said Sarah Holowinski, Washington director for Human Rights Watch, and a former senior human rights advisor at the Pentagon. Will it be that this time lessons are learned and U.S. policies and practices will change? Or is it going to remain the case that after the next strike, the U.S. military comes out and says, no, it was a perfect strike, we had all the intelligence we needed? Holowinski said McKenzie's apology and the fact that he raised compensation for the victims were positive signs. By the way, not trying to hope pill you guys on this story. I will say, however, that an official acknowledgement of wrongdoing and an attempt to raise compensation is admittedly more than the usually zero effort that is put forward here. But she added that it was imperative for the Pentagon to make public the findings of its assessment of the strike and any decisions about culpability to show that officials are serious about change. People should be in jail. At the very least, they should be disbarred. I can't believe that's even like a question. This wasn't even just civilian casualties. You have to understand. This wasn't like the United States bombed an enemy airport and there were civilians at that airport. This wasn't an attack on an enemy force that ended up leading to incidental civilian casualties. This was a glut of information which should have exonerated a man who was then, along with 7 children and 2 men, did I say this? Oh, disbarred for lawyers. Sorry, dishonorably discharged. Court-martialed. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I said disbarred. That's for lawyers, right? Yeah. This wasn't just like errant civilian casualties. This wasn't, like the consequences of war. And I'm not a bleeding heart liberal about this shit either, okay? I know that any prolonged military engagement in another country will lead to civilian deaths. It is an inevitable component of military engagement. That doesn't mean it's good. It's horrible, but I'm not delusional enough to believe that the U.S. is capable of invading other countries and occupying them without stuff bad happening. But this isn't just bad stuff happening. This is such an unfathomable fucking deviation. This is a rejection not only of the principles that our country, in the eyes of some very idealistic people, is supposed to uphold. This is also, frankly, a complete waste of our military apparatus. It's pathetic. How hard do you have to fuck up when you have the American military intelligence complex on your side? It's unfathomable incompetency, okay? We aren't Hamas. We don't fire bottle rockets or send balloons filled with pop rocks to our enemies. We have the most advanced, extremely expensive technology available at our disposal in the world. Nothing, no force, no civilization has ever come close to what the United States is capable of doing in the realm of destruction. Nobody kills better than us. We're better at it than anyone who has ever lived. And we still do this! With all the technology in the world, you're telling me there's nothing the Pentagon could have done to maybe review the footage or consider the possibility that having large containers of something in an occupied country having utility shortages might be something other than bombs? Or attack them in the house they were in the moment they went in? You're not going to take any time to get drone footage of people who might be in that house? You're not going to take any time to figure out if there might be a dynamic you want to analyze further? The guy was parked at a building. It's not like the building has a secret tunnel underneath it that leads to the Kabul airport that he was going to go do a fucking suicide bombing at. You had the guy at a house. You could have waited a second to review the footage, but they don't care. That's it. They don't care. Overconfident and boisterous. Powerful men telling powerful men to get what they want done because Biden couldn't end up looking weak, and they have to do whatever it takes to make sure somebody feels the retributive wrath of America after we experienced 1/100,000th of what we've done to Afghanistan at the Kabul airport. On Capitol Hill, some promise to lean on the Pentagon for answers and conduct vigorous oversight to ensure there is full transparency and accountability. We need to know what went wrong in the hours and minutes leading up to the strike to prevent similar tragedies in the future. I want the people who were responsible for signing off on the strike in front of Congress. I want their name there on a badge on their chest as they sit there and are grilled by a congressional committee. I want their names to be household. We make household names of common murderers, don't we? Regular murderers? Somebody kills a white woman in a park and everyone knows the guy's name by noon? But what? When murder is anonymous and militarized, it just gets to just fly off into the wind. Unknown, unhold. Leading Republicans, meanwhile, refused to accept McKinsey's statement that he is fully responsible for the attack, warning that the Biden administration's posture on Afghanistan meant only more risk that such mistakes would occur in the future. I can't believe I'm saying this, but the Republicans are right. McKenzie can take full responsibility if he wants, but at the end of the day, the buck does stop with Biden, the commander-in-chief. President Biden bears ultimate responsibility, Senator James N. Inhofe, the Armed Services Committee's top Republican, in a statement adding that the president's precipitous withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan has left our military with an impossible mission of countering terrorists without any personnel or partners on the ground. We don't have to counter anyone. We left. Also, remember that if a Republican ever says this, you still don't have to listen to them because Republicans don't actually care. Remember when Trump quadrupled drone strikes and then killed so many civilians they stopped reporting on it and Republicans never gave a single fuck? Never listen to a Republican, okay? Even when a Republican is right, in the rare moments when the moons align, they're right, they're still wrong. It's incredible. What a talent they have. The August 29 strike shows how difficult and complex counterterrorism operations can be. Unfortunately, it highlights that an over-the-horizon strategy will only increase the complexity and difficulty. We need a more realistic strategy for keeping Americans and Afghan civilians safe. Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, maybe a little. There's a lot of information on this out there that I could drone on over for a long time, but I think you understand the essential points. Look, an unfortunate reality of this country... Oh, I didn't actually mean that pun. Sorry. An unfortunate reality of this country is that a lot of the military action that we engage in, I'd say maybe most, is pride-based. Iraq was pride-based. After 9/11, people get so riled up, and you'll justify anything when you're angry, you know. And it leads to stuff like this. Now, thankfully, this wasn't another invasion of Iraq, you know. This wasn't a 20-year-long war being instigated, so it wasn't as bad, consequently, as things which have happened in the past. But it was still a terrible thing. Good man, and then two other presumably good men. Maybe they were bad. I don't know. Probably not bad enough to warrant being extrajudicially executed by the U.S. And 7 children, gonna say they were good, killed through rote incompetence by the U.S. military. And it really makes me wonder what we're doing with our money. I understand the job of policing countries from afar is difficult and dangerous, which is why maybe we shouldn't fucking do it. Maybe. But if there was any kind of action for us to take, anything whatsoever, you know, imagine the best drone strike. ISIS-K just suicide bombed the Kabul airport, but thankfully, we got a note handed to us. It was very dramatic, like House of Cards. Biden woke up one morning and somebody had duct taped a note to his forehead. And after removing the note and the skin with the duct tape, he looked at it and it said the address of the ISIS-K headquarters where they're planning to do a suicide bombing on the White House. Don't know how they're doing it, but... and then Biden orders a drone strike, and the drone strike kills a dozen ISIS-K members, and then more bombs go off because they had so many bombs in their headquarters. Yes, they got ISIS's address. Now, would I be mad about that drone strike? Honest to God, no, not really. I wouldn't be super mad about it. The real problem with drone warfare isn't that it's never done anything good. If you look back through the innumerable groups of people who have been killed by U.S. drone strikes, a lot of them are ISIS members. I will not mourn them. The problem is that it opens up the avenue for so much bad. It is a categorically dangerous thing to enable. When you kill through drone strikes, you depersonalize warfare. The cost of killing through drones is very low relative to the cost of deploying troops on the ground. There are no political consequences to drone strikes. Not really. Boots on the ground, and if a U.S. soldier bites it in a military action, that costs you politically. So drone strikes make violence politically cheap. You can do it pretty much anywhere in the world, and you can do it with essentially no chance of risking the possibility of dropping your approval numbers. You can just do it anywhere and everywhere all the time with very little oversight because they're fucking drones. And there is at least tangentially, a humane element to drones, making it possible to do surgical attacks on facilities without risking US troops' lives. If we're going to like kill a bunch of ISIS dudes and they're stocked up in a compound, I would rather the drone do it than send troops in to capture the territory. You know, if we knew it was an ISIS facility, sure, whatever, save the life, have only them die. Fine. But that's not the reality of most drone strikes. The reality of most drone strikes is that they are ambiguously justified and rarely investigated. That's the majority. And what that means is drone strikes, as a policy, are incredibly destructive. And that's really bad. Maybe there's a world where they can be exercised responsibly. Maybe in countries where we have semi-occupational jurisdiction and a robust on-the-ground spy network, maybe we could be effective in killing the people who actually deserve death sometimes, and maybe there are elements of justification to that. But the policy that we have now is nothing even close to that. The level of scrutiny that you have to meet to get away with a drone strike is vanishingly low. And I gotta ask you guys, what do you think we would learn if journalists could investigate every drone strike we had ever done? They investigated this one because it was high profile, evidently untrustworthy, and in a highly politically contentious moment in time. If they could investigate all the hundreds and thousands, what do you think they'd find? How many more apologies do you think we would get from the Pentagon? In the absence of perfect information, we have to act distrustfully towards our own government because they have been shown they have the incentive to lie to us. And it is for that reason that I say confidently, fuck the Pentagon, fuck Biden, and fuck the US military-industrial complex. They can all eat shit. And to anyone who asks me whether I'm still glad I voted for Biden, the answer is yep, because if Trump had won, he probably would have bombed the entirety of Kabul and then redeployed troops because he's afraid of his little baby boy, small ego ass getting burned by whatever retaliatory violence was directed at US troops while they were on their way out of the airport, okay? That's the answer, okay? Because fuck Biden, and if Trump had done it, then fuck him too. He probably would have done something worse. I don't know. God, can you imagine how bad that would have been? We live in a bad enough world as it is. Let's not invent ghosts for ourselves.